Jake Walker's shuttle crashed just after sunrise. The small Earth Explorer ship hit something in the sky, maybe a strange bird. Maybe a hidden rock. Now it lay smoking between thick trees and green vines. Jake coughed as he pulled himself out of the wreckage, his suit torn and his boots muddy. The forest around him was too quiet. No animals, no wind. No sound, only the soft crackle of dying fire. He checked his communicator, but it was dead. No signal, no way to call for help. He was stuck here for now, maybe 4 days. Jake sighed, grabbed his small pack, and began walking. His mission was peaceful exploration, but now it had become survival. The trees of this world were tall and strange, their leaves glowing faint. Blue in the shadows, some plants shimmered like glass, others looked like soft skin. Jake saw no danger yet. But something about this place felt different, like it was watching him. By midday, Jake reached a small clearing with a pool of clear water. He drank carefully, then sat to rest. But that's when he heard it, a sound, soft and broken, coming from the bushes. It wasn't a beast or machine, it was crying. He stood up slowly, eyes scanning the green shadows. "Hello," he called out. Not too loud, no answer. Only the sound of something breathing fast. Hiding, afraid. Jake stepped forward, careful not to scare whatever it was. He moved a branch aside and froze. There, curled behind a wide, glowing leaf, was a girl, an alien girl, young, maybe his age or a little younger. Her skin sparkled like moonlight on water, silver blue with faint green lines under it. Her eyes were big and bright, full of fear. She didn't look dangerous, but she looked hurt. She covered herself quickly, scared, shaking. Jake dropped to one knee and raised his hands, showing he had no weapons. "It's okay," he said softly. "I won't hurt you." She didn't speak, only stared, breathing hard. He took a protein bar from his pocket and placed it gently on the ground. Then he backed away, giving her space. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, with one hand, she grabbed the bar and sniffed it. She ate like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Jake sat on a nearby rock, not looking directly at her. After a while, she stood and walked back into the trees, still watching him. She didn't say a word. But before leaving, she looked back, one size full of something strange. Fear, maybe, or maybe curiosity. That night, Jake made a small fire and stayed near his broken shuttle. He couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her, the way she looked, so sad, so scared. Why was she alone in a forest like this? Where was her home, her people? Around midnight, he heard soft footsteps near the fire. He didn't move, just waited. Then he saw her again, standing between two trees. Watching the flames, she didn't come closer, but she didn't leave either. Jake tossed another protein bar near the edge of the firelight and turned away. She stepped forward, picked it up, and stayed, watching the flames dance. Neither of them spoke, but somehow it felt like something had changed. She was no longer just a stranger. She was a mystery. And Jake couldn't let it go. The next morning, she was gone. But something strange had been left behind, right where she had stood. In the dirt were small glowing stones. They weren't there before. Jake picked one up. It felt warm, humming gently in his hand, like it was alive. His heart pounded. What was this? Why would she leave it behind? And most importantly, was it safe? Or was it something else entirely? Jake didn't know it yet, but this girl wasn't just an alien. She carried a secret that could change everything. And it had already begun to show itself in the dirt. Glowing softly under the morning light, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the glowing stones he found that morning. He held one in his hand and stared at it for a long time. It was smooth, warm, and pulsing gently with light. Not like any jewel he had ever seen on Earth. He tried to scan it with a broken piece of his gear, but it didn't match anything in the database. It wasn't just rare, it was completely unknown. That evening, as the sky turned dark and the forest lights shimmered around him, Jake returned to the clearing where he had first met her. He left more food near the glowing leaf, just like before, and sat back to wait. This time, he didn't have to wait long. He heard light footsteps behind him, soft like falling rain. When he turned, she was already standing there, closer than before, watching him carefully. Her eyes still held fear, but also something new, trust, maybe, or at least curiosity. Jake smiled gently and sat down again, showing her he wasn't a threat. He pointed at his chest and said, "Jake," then waited. The girl didn't speak right away, but after a pause, she whispered, "Lyria." Her voice was quiet, like she hadn't spoken in a long time. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then, without a word, Lyria turned and walked toward the trees. Jake hesitated, but followed at a distance, not wanting to lose her. She led him to a small stream hidden behind thick vines and glowing mushrooms. There, she sat on a stone and held her stomach. Wincing in pain, Jake didn't know what to do. He wanted to help, but didn't want to scare her. He stayed back and waited. Lyria looked around, made sure she was alone, then crouched behind a thick bush. Jake heard soft breathing, then a quiet gasp. When she stepped out again, her hands were shaking. She walked away slowly, without noticing that Jake had followed. Once she was gone, he stepped toward the bush, curious but cautious. What he saw stopped him cold. Lying in the dirt were more of the glowing stones, freshly made, still warm. And suddenly, everything made sense. Lyria had produced them. It wasn't magic or treasure from the trees. They came from her own body. Jake's mind raced, trying to understand, why would anyone hide something like this? Why did she look so ashamed after it happened? He didn't touch the stones this time, just stared at them, feeling something heavy inside his chest. Was this why she was hiding in the forest? Were others looking for her because of this strange ability? He remembered her first word to him, shame. Now, it hurt even more, knowing she carried this secret like a burden, not a gift. When Jake returned to camp that night, Lyria was already there, sitting by the fire. She didn't run this time. She just looked at him with tired eyes. Jake didn't say anything about what he saw. He just sat beside her and handed her some fruit. She took it slowly and whispered, "Thank you." Then she looked away, embarrassed. Jake wanted to tell her that she didn't have to be ashamed, that what she had was special, amazing, even, but he didn't want to push her. He just said, "It's okay, Lyria," and offered a smile. She didn't smile back, not yet, but she didn't leave either. And for the first time, Jake felt that maybe she wanted to stay, even if just for a little while longer, in the quiet of the jungle. With firelight dancing on their faces, two strangers sat side by side, and though they came from different worlds, they both carried something heavy inside, a secret, a scar, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to heal. Jake looked at the stars above, and deep inside, he knew this was no normal encounter. Lyria's secret would soon change everything, and he was already too deep to walk away. The wind was different that morning. Jake noticed it first, a strange tension in the air, like something was watching from the trees. Even the glowing leaves seemed to shake a little more than usual. He packed his small bag quickly, sensing danger. Lyria hadn't come to the fire last night. That alone worried him. She always came, even if just for a few minutes. But now, the forest was silent again, like it had been before they met. Too silent, Jake moved carefully through the jungle, following the soft trail of blue-green footprints only he knew how to spot. Lyria walked lightly, but her toes left faint heat marks on certain plants, marks that faded after hours. He learned to read them, like ancient clues left just for him after an hour. He heard something that made his heart jump. Voices, not human, not Lyria's, rough, clicking voices with cruel laughter in between. He dropped to his knees and crawled through the bushes. And what he saw chilled his blood. Lyria was trapped. She hung in midair, caught in a floating energy net light blue threads, holding her body like a puppet. Her face was bruised, eyes wide with fear. Surrounding her were 3 large aliens with armor made of bones and steel. They wore masks, but their body language spoke of power. They weren't travelers or explorers, they were hunters. One of them held a scanner, beeping fast every time it pointed toward Lyria. Jake understood right away they were tracking her for her body's secret. The jewels. He remembered something she had told him with shaking hands. I hide because they hunt what I cannot stop now. It was true. Right in front of him, Jake had no weapons, no armor. Just a half-broken pocket knife and his fists. But he didn't think twice. He grabbed a rock, threw it far to the left, and the sound snapped the hunter's attention. They turned and moved toward the noise, giving Jake a few precious seconds. He rushed forward, slid under the glowing net, and reached for the control pad attached to the floating drone. He didn't know what he was doing, just pressed everything. Sparks flew, the net flickered, and Lyria dropped into his arms, barely conscious. The hunters turned, howled in anger, and raised their weapons. Jake didn't look back. He grabbed Lyria and ran, his legs slamming into roots and rocks, lungs burning with fear. Blaster fire hit the trees near him. Branches exploded, and leaves caught fire, but he kept running, holding Lyria tight against his chest. She opened her eyes slightly and whispered something he didn't understand. But her arms wrapped weakly around his neck. She knew he had come for her. She trusted him, even now, even like this. Jake slid down a hill and landed in a muddy stream behind him. He heard the hunters crashing through the forest, but he had an idea. He pushed through the thick brush and led Lyria toward an old ravine he had seen earlier. There, he hid her under a thick root, then turned back and started shouting, "Hey!" He yelled, "You want the jewels? Come get me instead." It worked. 2 of the hunters changed direction and followed him. Jake ran in circles, threw more rocks, and made as much noise as possible, until finally he lost them in the mist near to the waterfalls. When he returned to the root hiding spot, Lyria was still there, her skin pale and her body shaking. He held her close and whispered, "You're safe, I've got you." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't over. There were more hunters out there, more people who wanted her secret. And Jake now understood something clearly. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a war for her freedom, and whether he liked it or not, he was part of it now. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat beside Lyria in the cave, watching her chest rise and fall slowly. Her skin had lost its soft glow, now dim like a dying ember. The forest outside was too quiet again. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was warning them something worse was coming, and Jake could feel it in his bones. When the first light crept over the trees, Lyria opened her eyes. She winced as she tried to sit up, and Jake gently helped her. She looked at him for a long moment, then touched his chest and said softly, "You saved me." Jake gave a half smile. "You saved me first, remember?" She looked away, ashamed again, but Jake wasn't going to let her stay in that pain. He sat across from her and whispered, "I know." Her eyes widened slightly, and she froze. Jake continued, "I saw the jewels, Lyria, the ones you leave behind." She dropped her head, her voice shaking. "You think I'm monster?" Jake leaned closer. "No, I think you're amazing." It took her a long time to speak again. She began to tell him, in broken English, the story she had carried alone for years. Her kind was once free, peaceful, living deep within. Crystal mountains where their bodies could safely release energy as jewels. But when others found out, they were captured, traded, mined like machines. Her mother had hidden her in a pod and launched her into the forest before soldiers came. She had never seen her again. Jake listened, heart heavy. She said that process hurt more when she was scared or in danger, and that it damaged her body over time. "That's why I run," she said, touching her side in pain. "I don't want to break." He looked at her, serious now. "We're not running anymore, later." That day, Jake climbed a high ridge. Trying to get a better view of the terrain, he needed a plan somewhere safe, a place where no one could track her anymore. That's when he saw it movement in the sky. A small black ship with a long silver emblem on the side. It wasn't the hunters, not this time. It was worse, a mining syndicate. The ones who came with contracts and smiles, then left with chains and cages. They didn't use guns, they used papers and scanners. They offered safety. But Jake had seen their kind before on other planets. They made people like Lyria into property. He rushed back to the cave, heart pounding. Lyria sat with her knees pulled to her chest, staring at the glowing cave walls. When she saw his face, she knew they'd come again. She said quietly. Jake nodded. "But this time, we fight smart." He laid out pieces of broken tech, vines, even the jewels Lyria left behind. He started building traps, motion sensors using glowing bugs, nets made from strong forest roots, noise bombs with echo rocks. Lyria helped as much as she could, guiding him to parts of the forest that reacted to sound or heat. They worked like a team, not hunter and prey anymore, but partners. As night fell, they heard the hum of the syndicate's engines above the trees. Searchlights began sweeping the jungle, and a soft, robotic voice echoed through the leaves, too. The gifted female, "We bring peace, food, and protection. Reveal yourself and be rewarded." Lyria flinched, but Jake held her hand tight. He whispered, "They lie," and she nodded. This time without fear. In the dark, under the heavy branches, Jake and Lyria waited. The traps were ready. The cave was hidden. And her spirit, though. "Fragile's no longer broken," she whispered. "I'm tired of running." Jake looked at her and replied, "Then let's make them run." And just like that, the hunted had become the defenders, and the forest held its breath for what was coming next. The jungle didn't sleep that night. It watched silently as strangers with soft voices and metal boots moved between the trees. They wore white suits with clean logos and spoke into small devices, pretending to offer safety, but the forest knew better. So did Jake, from the cave's edge. He watched them, his eyes locked on the man in front, a tall, calm speaker with silver hair and a smooth voice. "She's a rare biological phenomenon," the man told his crew. "Handle her with care. We want her alive and compliant." Jake clenched his fists, hidden behind thick roots. He wasn't going to let them take Lyria, not while he still breathed. Lyria sat deeper in the cave, legs folded, her skin softly glowing again, but dim with exhaustion. She didn't speak, but Jake could tell her fear had returned. Not the fear of pain, but the fear of cages, the kind lined with golden words and velvet promises. Jake had an idea. He pulled out a broken lens from his crashed ship and began carving small lines into it. He placed one of Lyria's glowing stones inside and wrapped it with vines soaked in sap. When he pressed a finger to it, the whole thing flashed, a bright, blinding light just enough to confuse anyone nearby. Lyria watched him work, silent at first, then slowly crawled forward. She handed him another jewel. "Larger, warmer," she whispered. "Use this one last," as the first two scouts passed near. The cave Jake triggered the first trap. A burst of sound echoed through the trees. Loud and sudden, the scouts stumbled back, shouting for backup. Then came the net's root-woven lines that dropped like webs from the branches. The jungle had become their weapon, but Jake knew it wouldn't hold them forever. The syndicate was trained, patient, and armed with better tools. Soon they sent in drones floating metal eyes that buzzed low to the ground, scanning every movement. One of them reached the cave, and its red light scanned Lyria's heat signature. It beeped, prepared to alert the crew until Jake jumped out and smashed it with a rock. Sparks flew, and he dropped into a roll, breathing hard. The explosion brought the team running. Now it was no longer slow searching, it was a hunt again. Jake grabbed Lyria's hand and whispered, "We move now." They ran together through the glowing roots, ducking under vines, climbing fallen logs. Lyria's body trembled from pain, but she didn't stop. They reached the river cliffs, a drop far below with wild water rushing over jagged stones. Behind them, shouts grew louder, closer. Jake turned to Lyria, breathing fast. "I can hold them off. You go." She shook her head, stepping back. She reached into her side bag and pulled out the large jewel, the one she said to save. It pulsed like a heart, glowing brighter every second. She whispered something in her language, then looked at Jake and nodded. He didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't running anymore. She stepped forward, raised the jewel, and slammed it onto the stone ground. There was no explosion, no flame. Instead, a sudden wave of light pushed outward in a silent shock. The ground lit up with blue veins, like the forest itself had awakened. The syndicate crew stumbled, blinded by the sudden light, their visors flashing red with warnings. Some fell, some froze, some screamed. Lyria stood tall, her body glowing from within now, and in that moment, Jake didn't see her as someone needing rescue. He saw her as something ancient and powerful, something this forest was made to protect. When the light faded, silence followed. The syndicate had scattered, confused and beaten by something they didn't understand. Jake looked around, stunned. Then back at Lyria. She fell to her knees, breathing hard, her hands shaking. Jake ran to her side, caught her just before she collapsed. He held her close and whispered, "You did it." But she didn't respond, her eyes fluttering shut, and as he lifted her in his arms, he realized that her gift, whatever it truly was, came at a great cost. And they hadn't escaped yet, because far above, in the shadow of the clouds, a second ship had just entered the sky. And this one wasn't here to offer contracts. It was here to collect what the first team failed to capture. The sky was no longer blue. It had turned dark, not from nightfall, but from the shadow of the second ship. Bigger, heavier, slower, but made for one purpose only: capture. Jake stood at the river's edge, holding Lyria in his arms, watching the ship descend like a monster swallowing the sun. He had no more traps, no more surprises. His muscles ached, his mind raced. Lyria's skin flickered weakly in his arms, like a dying star. She had used everything she had to save them from the first group. Now she had nothing left. The new ship didn't speak through loudspeakers. It didn't offer peace, safety, or deals. It just opened its bay doors, and out came silent machines, black-armored enforcers with scanner eyes and net launchers. They moved like ghosts, fast, focused, unafraid. Jake knew they had to disappear again. He carried Lyria deep into the cliffs, where waterfalls masked their heat and sound. But these new hunters weren't like the others. They were tracking the last pulse of energy Lyria had released. They didn't care about forests or roots or camouflage. They followed signals, patterns, math. He found an old, hollow tree, wide enough for two. He covered the opening with wet leaves and soot, hiding their scent. Inside, Lyria opened her eyes just enough to see his face. She whispered, "I can't." "Run again." Jake touched her cheek gently. "Then I'll run for both of us." He watched through the cracks in the bark as the black hunters passed by, scanning the rocks and earth with lasers. One paused, its eye flashing red. Jake held his breath, but the machine turned and moved on. Fooled by the natural interference of the falls, still, they couldn't hide forever. Hours passed, maybe more. Jake listened to Lyria's breathing, shallow and slow. He thought about what she had become to him, not just a mystery, or a girl from another world. She was a life he couldn't ignore, a voice that had never been heard, and he was her only shield now. Then he remembered something back on his broken ship. Deep in its emergency locker was a flare beacon if he could reach it and launch it into orbit. It might call a rescue ship, but it would also tell these hunters exactly where he was. He looked at Lyria again, her body curled and cold. She would never survive another day of hiding. There was no more time. Jake made his decision at dawn. He placed a gentle kiss on her forehead and whispered, "Trust me." Then he ran, faster than he ever had, back through the cliffs, over stones, under roots, bruising his legs on every step. He reached the wreck, crawled inside, and tore the locker open. There it was, Maul. Dusty, but still charged. He fired it into the sky, a thin blue streak rising fast until it vanished among the stars. For a second, nothing happened. Then, alarms blared across the hunters' frequencies. They turned like wolves catching a scent, and all of them moved toward Jake. He didn't run. He stood tall on the wreckage, arms wide, as if to say, "I'm right here." They swarmed him, tackled him, bound him in cold nets. But as he was pulled into their shuttle, he smiled, because far behind him the flare was already bouncing off satellites in orbit. And somewhere out there, someone was reading it. Someone who had come not for treasure, but for a man who wouldn't let an alien girl become a product. And as Jake sat in chains, his body sore and eyes burning, he whispered to himself, "Just hold on, Lyria. Help is coming." The cell was cold. Jake sat in silence, hands bound behind his back with metal bands. The floor hummed under him, the ship cruising low over the forest as it scanned for more signals. Outside the reinforced glass window, the jungle stretched wide, but his eyes were focused on something far away, something beyond this ship. Beyond this world. He didn't know if Lyria had survived the night. He didn't know if the beacon had reached anyone, but he knew what he had done. He'd traded his freedom for hers. And strangely, he felt no regret. One of the guards came in, silent and faceless. It placed a scanner over Jake's face and tapped something on a tablet. Subject: Human, non-market asset, value 0, the machine voice said. Then it paused, the screen flashing with unexpected data. Another voice came through the comms. One Jake didn't recognize, calm, human, and confident. "This is Commander Hale of the United Human Alliance. We've received an illegal beacon from this sector. Release our citizen now, or prepare to be boarded." Jake's heart jumped. They came. The beacon had worked. In the next moment, alarms blared across the ship. The guards moved fast, shouting codes, but it was too late. A bright white beam sliced through the clouds outside as a rescue pod crashed down. It wasn't a fight, it was a message. You don't touch what's human and walk away free. The cell door burst open, and 2 armored soldiers ran in. Pulling Jake to his feet, he could barely walk, but he managed to smile. "There's someone else," he whispered. "In the cliffs, Lyria. She's still out there, while Jake was." Carried to safety, the second team swept through the jungle. Thermal scans picked up a faint live signal deep in the roots of an ancient tree. When they found her, Lyria was barely breathing, curled up like a dying flame. They didn't touch her right away. They scanned first, gently, then wrapped her in thermal sheets and whispered, "It's okay now." Back at the ship, Jake waited by the medbay door, covered in bruises, but refusing to rest. When they wheeled her in, he rushed to her side. She opened her eyes slowly, blinked at the lights above her, and then at him. "You came back," she whispered. Jake laughed softly. "Told you I'd run for both of us." Weeks later, on Earth, Lyria sat in a sunlit garden near the human embassy. Children laughed nearby, and birds sang in the trees. She wore soft clothes. Now, her skin glowing gently with no pain. Scientists had studied Herb with permission, with kindness. They learned that the jewels she produced were tied to emotion, to stress, and that peace true peace was the only way to stop the pain. Jake sat beside her on the bench, tossing crumbs to a bird. "You're famous now?" he said, smiling. She rolled her eyes. "I don't want to be treasure." Jake shook his head. "You're not, Lyria, not anymore. You're family." Now, and for the first time in her life, Lyria laughed, not because she had to, but because she finally could, in a galaxy that once saw her as a product, a prize, or a prisoner. She had become something far greater, a symbol of what happens when one human decides to protect, not possess, and somewhere in that peaceful world, a forgotten jewel still lay in the jungle. Glowing gently, not as currency, but as a reminder. That value was never in the stone. It was in the soul who left it behind.